ultimately this is not a financial problem. Like when you really get, start to peel back the layers of the gambling onion, it's really not about the money.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time Addiction Recovery Podcast. My name is Rob, and I'm here with a very special guest today who's going to be talking about gambling addiction and the harm that it's brought into his life. His name is Tyler M. Tyler, would you like to do a little introduction for yourself, real quick?
Yeah, hey Rob. First of all, really appreciate you having me on. Think you're making some really good content. But I'm Tyler M. My last bet was 121.23, and I am a compulsive gambler.
Okay. What first got you into gambling? Like, how did it all start?
I guess the best way to do it is just kind of start from the beginning and kind of, let
Yeah.
you know, like how I got to the point I'm at today. So, really, gambling's like always been a part of my life, to be completely honest. As early as fourth, fifth grade, I was doing bracket pools, for March Madness, and even have this story of like fifth grade, I like printed out all these brackets and got with my friends and made everyone put $1 in. And this one kid wanted to do it, and I was like, if you don't have $1, you can't play. So I ended up
Mm.
getting sent to the like principal's office for like essentially gambling in fifth grade. So it dates all the way back to then, and then
Mm.
even through high school, I played a lot of junior golf. So I was always either playing for money with adults or
Yep.
with friends. We would pair up, and I was always the one setting the odds or setting the matchups. So it's really always been part of my life, and I would say I placed my first traditional bet my first year of college.
Mm.
Sports betting, sports have always been part of my life. I go to probably like 50 to 70 games a year. So, uh, like most people right now, it was kind of an easy, like, oh, like I'm watching games every day. I'll just start betting on it. And
Mm.
first year of college, I would say it was pretty average amount, weekends, primetime games, core, American sports, football, like NFL, basketball. Um, and then as the second year kind of went on, second year of college, uh, volume started to increase, bet size got a little bigger. And
Mm.
right before COVID shut everything down that last day, when it kind of seemed like things were trending in the direction of like there might not be sports for a while, I placed like the biggest single bet that I had placed at the time, and it was to pretty much get even uh, from
Mm.
like the previous weeks. And I would say that's when, probably was the first sign of like, okay, this is outside of like the amount, like, I got, like the sweats, like real, like
Mm.
adrenaline pumping. And of course, as most of us compulsive gamblers know, like, hit that first big bet. And so I was like, oh, this is great. Don't know any money going into COVID. Um, and, as COVID kind of progressed, and sports started to come back early, it was
Mm.
mostly, Eastern European sports, soccer, tennis, stuff that I had watched major soccer and tennis before, but that's when I started, getting into like, oh, like I can bet from when I wake up till I go to bed pretty much. There's always something on, and you start to kind of think like, oh, there's edges in these smaller sports or this and that, but with COVID being so isolated, really just you know got in the mindset of like, if I want to bet, I can bet at any point from the comfort of my phone. Um,
Mm.
and then, this pretty, I'll call this the last phase of it was, coming out of COVID, ended up getting, first real job opportunity and moving out of my hometown. And it was the first time I'd really, lived alone. Like I would lived with a bunch of people in college and then, had a pretty good support group growing up. So, moved to a bigger city, had maybe one or two people I knew, and my girlfriend at the time was still living in Florida. So, really all I had was work 9 to 5
Mm.
and come home and bet on sports. That was pretty much what my everyday was for a good 6 or 7 months, and
Mm.
that's when it started to as the weeks and months go by, the debt started to climb up, and in March of this past year, 2022, was when I took out, started to borrow money to finance my gambling. That was really an accelerator as far as the financial
Mm.
problems starting to build. And, throughout that whole year, 2022 into 23, you know, every day, 8 to 10 hours a day, either betting or reading about, you know, betting. Pretty much, if I wasn't working and I wasn't sleeping, my mind was wrapped around betting,
Mm.
and ultimately ran out of borrowing options, ran out of money on August 30th of 2022, and that was kind of my, like, I would say it was my rock bottom. Had to
Mm.
fully uh, this is the first time I really spoke out and had to come clean with my now fiance and
Mm.
family that I've you know racked up credit cards. This is what I've been doing with my life essentially the last 3 years, and tried to fix it. After that happened, thankfully they were all very supportive. They wanted me to get better, and
Mm.
I tried to fix it on my own. Wrote out a plan. Was like, I'm gonna pay off this debt. Like, we'll make a plan for it. And I won't bet again. Didn't end up going to a GA room at the time,
Mm.
uh, but rather just try to battle it with my fiance and I. Had 8 good weeks, 2 months of no betting. Thought things were good, and then had some car troubles, and brain instantly went to, well, maybe if I just do like a $20 or $30 bet, uh, it won't be that big of a deal. I feel like I might have this under control. And
Mm.
sure enough, first day, made a bunch of money, paid off the car repairs that I had to get done, and I was just right back into the same, um, cycle that I'd been in the previous years. Uh,
Yeah.
Ultimately, that got caught in October, because right after that big win, slowly started to, you know behavior started going back to what it had been, and started losing money again.
Mm.
And at that point, my fiance, kind of gave me the ultimatum of, like, we can't, do this together. Like, you need to seek a room. And went into my first meeting in around middle of October, and really did not want to go. Was pretty much forced to go, and
Mm.
walked out of it like, weight completely lifted off my shoulders. Like, totally didn't expect it. Thought I was going to walk in there and it was going to be a bunch of old guys, pretty much, you know, talking about how they were, lost all their money at the racetrack, pretty much. But, got in my first room, uh, have only missed like 1 or 2 meetings because of vacation since then.
Mm.
So probably up to like 15, 20 meetings since October, and have only had, I had one relapse day, um, a single bet, 30, $40 uh,
Mm.
on an Eagles game in the playoffs. And that was my last bet, 121-23. And here we are, May 5th, and I haven't made a
Yeah.
bet since. So that's my story
Great.
um, in its entirety. So,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And it's really interesting to me how many similarities there are between my story and yourself. And I've found that that's the commonality between us as gamblers. We all share a lot of the same background when it comes to having the bet ramp up, getting to a point where we were affecting others, and then eventually coming in and finding help. So I'm really happy to hear that you've been bet free for about, what is that, 4 months now? That's awesome.
yeah, coming up on past 100 days a little bit ago. But,
Congrats, man.
like
That's
you,
awesome.
yeah, it's been a good time for sure.
One thing that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned from your story was, you mentioned that when sports were just starting to come back, there was like the Eastern European sports, and tennis is one of the examples you gave. When people ask me what sport I used to gamble on the most, I always replied tennis. And it was just because of how many bets you can place within one particular match. It's broken down into so many sub matches that there's just endless bets, it seems. Do you feel like the accessibility to online gambling and like this new route that we're seeing of offering so much live betting, so many live betting options, do you think that's going to end up being very dangerous in a sense that it could become like the next epidemic?
I definitely think it's trending. I think there are aspects to live betting that are I would say very predatory. Uh, because really, like, how can you quantify the likelihood of, something happening like in the next instant? You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
think it's, I mean, I kind of relate it to, like those tap machines you can kind of see at the gas station where it's really just giving you an avenue to just be like, not only did I bet on this game in its entirety, like now I'm getting down to the minute detail of like, is this guy going to make a three in the next 30 seconds?
Right.
You know, um, but that's, it goes into it. I think it goes a lot further into especially just, this generation of,
Mhm.
very instantaneous gratification, right? You're
Yeah.
always on your phone. You always want to see, you want to be the first to know something on Twitter. Um, you know, I think our generation is especially prone to things where it can be like, let's go back to tennis. Like, is this guy
Right.
going to win this single point that lasts 30 seconds? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you could win your whole day, your lunch in 30 seconds. So it's, it being at your fingertips combined with kind of all those other factors is definitely, um, something people have to look out for. And
For
I
sure.
think it almost, in a way, I think live betting is added fuel to the fire for compulsive gamblers.
I
Um,
completely agree. And when I was live betting, I felt like I had like a strong investment in the game and that I was just so into it that it's the only thing I ever wanted to do. In fact, in the beginning, I thought that I could, get better and maybe even be a professional gambler. Did you ever have like a feeling like that yourself? Like, oh, you should do this full time instead of working?
so as far as professional, I was definitely more under the mindset of not like I'm gonna pay my bills with win-ins. I feel like I'm a very good writer. I have an analytics background through school. Like maybe this is an avenue where I could work for a action network. DraftKings has people who do a
Mm.
lot of articles, so that's when outside of just betting all the time, like I was trying to get into the nitty gritty of understanding the value, kind of understanding how odds are built and how uh, the community can shift certain things and just kind of the science behind it, which is I
Mm.
find incredibly ironic because I know the odds are stacked against me, but you know whenever I was in action, I just couldn't stop. You know, I like to think I give people even before I went into a room, good advice on hey, this is extremely volatile. The odds are stacked against you, but when it came to myself, like I just couldn't. I could never find that healthy, responsible limit, unfortunately. So definitely did go through a period where I was like, this could be a job for me that I would love to do because what's easier than writing about sports and giving a pick where it doesn't even really matter if you win or lose,
Mm.
like you're still employed, right?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that when we're in action, we don't really think logically. A lot of gambling addicts actually test to have a very high IQ, but we tend to convince ourselves, we like, in an ironic way, we convince ourselves to keep gambling because we think we can beat it. We think we can beat the system that's beaten everyone else. Getting back into your story a little bit, was there ever a point, maybe towards the beginning of your like legal sports betting time, that you had like a big hit that got you hooked, that like kept you going, or was it always just a part of your life?
uh, I mean, I think there's definitely wins that you remember. There's always, I think when you're a compulsive gambler, you're betting so much that like you're I mean, not everyone, but you're bound to hit something big. When you're like in my case, when you're placing anywhere from 100 to 200 bets a day,
Right.
they start to add up. For me, it was always streaks. I remember a time I was in, the first time I went to New Jersey. Um, I think I was just traveling to see a buddy, and got the free play bonus for signing up and all that stuff,
Mm.
and just didn't lose for like a whole night, and just kept doubling it, all the way up to this huge amount, and then woke up the next day 7 a.m. and by the time lunch rolled around, like I'd lost all the winnings. So
Yeah.
that's it was a lot of cycles like that where like I kind of rode the hot streaks and then rode the cold streaks all the way
Yep.
to the bottom for me. So
No, I hear you
yeah,
there. For gambling addicts, I like to say that wins are just future losses because it's a common misunderstanding that like when we put out content like this, we're saying that like we never won. People like to think, "Oh, you guys were just bad at gambling." That's what a lot of people are going to say. But the reality is we placed so many bets and we had these big wins, but when you place that many bets, you just end up giving it back. And so I think you make a great point there of like bringing up the story where you hit big and then the next day it was gone. That's how I lived my life for years. So you're not alone in that. Was there ever a point that you like stopped yourself and you thought, am I gambling in a way that other people aren't? Did you ever have like that aha moment that you were a different kind of gambler?
so it definitely took a while because I think especially now, it's very if you're in that age group of 21 to or I guess 18 to 25, let's say,
Yeah.
uh, it's totally normal to have a group chat where all day there's just bets being sent in there.
Mm.
Where that just, I mean, that's a newer, you know, phenomenon, even with just, phones in general and just the acceptance of sports betting.
Mhm.
So, you know, in the beginning during college, like people, like I was just in a group where we were just talking about betting all day. So I was just like, everyone else is kind of doing this. I don't feel that different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, me and my roommate would just watch games like, all through the night in college. And so for a while, I was like, this isn't that abnormal. Like, this is, I guess, just what you do. Like
Right.
now, like this is just part of sports as you just bet on them. Um, I would say when I moved away from everything and I was by myself and I was texting a tennis tip at like 6 in the morning on a Monday and
Mhm.
my group chat like wasn't even awake or like my buddy was like, you know, almost just wouldn't respond. I'd be like, that was probably the first time where I was like, this is out of the realm of just like betting on Sunday night football
Yeah.
or, betting on a college basketball slate. This is kind of getting to the point where, you know, when people that bet with you all the time start looking at you like a little different, then that's almost a wake up call to be like, okay, have this may have started to get past the point of normalcy.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that once we move out of our realm of like sports that we watch every night for entertainment and we're gambling on, tennis at 6 a.m., that is the point when I personally began to have the same kind of thoughts as you. Like, why are none of my friends doing this? And for the gambling addicts out there that are watching this, because we're addicted and we're just trying to stay in action at all times. That's just the reality of it. But Tyler, I had a question for you about, I watch sports sometimes still. And when I watch sports, no matter what the game is, there's just, you get bombarded with these advertisements with celebrities endorsing gambling, like Kevin Hart on DraftKings, Jamie Foxx on MGM, etc. What do you think about these commercials? Are you like triggered by them, or do you think like it's something that we're just gonna have to get used to?
Uh, so for me, the I've gotten to the point even in this second 4 months where seeing the odds doesn't really trigger me.
Mm,
Not to say that it can be very triggering for some people. But I think I really don't see it going away as far as advertisements. I mean, almost every, arena has some sort of sportsbook affiliation, this and
mm,
that. The ads, I mean, at least now, not all 50 states have it. So I think that's sort of, better because even, you know, if you're in Kansas or a non-legal state and you see that ad, like you might be enticed by it, but ultimately you can't sign up for it.
mm.
So at least now there's some sort of barrier, but ultimately, the U.S. is a capitalist country, and they're gonna get famous people to push their product. Um, so surprisingly, I actually don't think the ads are as predatory as some of the other things once you get in there, but I guess it's all kind of part of the same thing to make money. Hopefully, they're you kind of think of it as scales, like they're overwhelmingly tilting the scale. Um, and I think at some point there's going to have to be, similar advertisements or groups or, you know, even, media like you're producing where you got to almost tip the scales back the other way. You know what I mean? Um,
Exactly.
so,
No, I know exactly what you mean, and that's mostly why I'm doing what I'm doing, is because, for years I would watch the streamers online, the slot streamers, and now I'm watching the ads when they come on TV. And as someone who's gambled for a quarter of my life, I understand that what you see on the TV or what you see on these videos doesn't show the true reality of what'll happen if you're betting 6 to 8 hours a day, like compulsive gamblers do. So that's exactly why I make the content that I make, is because we're not seeing the other side or that tipping of the scale, like you say. So I think you make a great point there. Just wanted to touch on that. So thank you for that. I go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. There's people out there that don't want to get involved with it because of the 12-step program, because it's based in spirituality, or because, like you said, they think the room won't be able to relate to them before they go in. Do you have any advice to someone who doesn't want to do it through GA? Do you think they have to do it through Gamblers Anonymous, or do you think there's another way?
so I do honestly think that GA GA is the only path to recovery. But I will say the first room you go to might not be the best room for you.
Good point.
And it might take, luckily, there's so many meetings. There's meetings every day, all the time. There's online meetings. Uh, but the first room you go to might not necessarily be the best for you long term. And I think the reason that it may be off-putting is, it's usually at a, place of worship. There's kind of a stigma around the 12 steps. Um, but in all reality, once you go, you realize that um, there's very, vague terms of like, a higher power or spirituality. And if the person leading that group for whatever reason is trying to push it one way that you don't like it, there's just so many other options to kind of go in a different direction. But
Mm,
I think ultimately you got to get yourself in the room. You have to identify, like, am I a compulsive gambler?
right.
Um, and if you are, that's the best place for you in your
Mm,
recovery. And I don't come from a super spiritual background, but at no point have I ever felt like it, was pushed upon me uh, to feel better. And because I know for me, like, I've tried therapy, I tried talking, like I said in my story, I try to do it by myself. And ultimately, if you're a compulsive gambler, yourself will not let you get better. It'll always, you might have 2 or 3 good weeks of like, oh, I didn't bet for 2 or 3 weeks. I can, I
mm,
can go and do this normally. And ultimately, um, if you have compulsive gambling, which is a emotional illness, um, unfortunately, there's no cure. And going to group therapy is just going to continue to give you tools in your tool belt to deal with those ads or deal with those triggers down the
mm,
road. Because you can't go to any doctor and they give you a red pill that says, all right, if you take this every day, you're not going to feel like you're going to want to bet.
right.
Um, the society we live in, like, you're going to be tempted to bet. Like, it's in your face as much as ever. And going to GA and hearing experiences from people that are the same as you, people that are different from you, that's going to give you this arsenal to attack each day one at a time.
Yeah.
uh, and it's just something we're going to deal with for the rest of our lives, so you might as well be as prepared as possible to continue on.
100%. I think that the only way to recover is to do a group therapy session like that. At this point, I don't know of many other alternatives to GA. So I am a proponent of GA, but once again, the reality is that as long as you're getting out there, you're in a support group of some kind for your specific addiction, that's giving you the best chance to recover. Whether it's GA or whether it's a SMART program or another thing like it, the most important thing is that you're finding that community and getting those conversations in. Because as you say, you are building tools in your tool belt to help you fight against what is going to be reality every single day. And it can be daunting if you're not well prepared. But once you're prepared, I mean, we might dive into it a little bit moving forward here, but the urges start to fade away with time. Did you notice after a certain amount of time that your urges were starting to fade?
Yeah, I think especially now the day to day is a lot easier.
Mm,
For me, the draft was a couple weeks ago, and that was the harder day. Out of the last 100 or so days, like, that's the harder day because that was like one of the few days, like, I always remember winning.
Hmm.
Whether it be just, it's a little bit independent of like, it's a lot of insider information, this and that. Like, I won't dive too deep into it, but like that was a day where I always won. And,
Hmm.
I woke up that day, started normal, and, you have those thoughts that kind of drift you in that direction. But, having that support group that we talked about from GA, like, people are one text away.
Right.
You don't, the longer you go, the more you don't feel like a burden to other people. Because when you come into the thing, you feel like, you know, if you end up in a GA room, it's usually because you've, hit a rock bottom or hit a point where, you know, you've either been forced to go or you get to the point where you're like, I have to go for my livelihood. And,
Hmm.
you start trusting those people, and you don't feel like you're the worst person in the world for sending a text to someone and say, hey, I'm struggling. Because, gambling aside, it's a hard thing, especially for guys, to just be like, I am not doing well
Yeah.
mentally. Like, it's hard to admit that, and you slowly build the confidence to, you might have that fleeting feeling, and you might start wanting to go in that direction, but you now have, someone to lean on to be like, hey, I'm feeling this way, and they can get you through that time. And
Yeah.
because you realize, like, it's very fleeting. Like, it's, 30, if someone can get you through that 30 minutes, like, you can go right back to the rest of your day sometimes. And, it's kind of, you always say delay, like, you just push it off, and you can kind of get through those hard times. But, it takes time to not just cave in at the first
Sure.
opportunity to go back into it. Because that's, whether it's a quarter of your life, half your life, however long you were gambling, your brain now is empty without gambling, and you have to find healthier ways to replace it, but it's
Hmm.
still hungry for it. You know what I mean?
Of course. And one thing that you bring up there is, gambling is in itself a form of instant gratification. It's something where you place a bet, and whether it's 5 minutes later or 5 seconds later, you know the outcome. So when you're dealing with the urges from gambling, the urge might last for only a couple seconds, but once you get that in your brain, if you're not properly prepared to deal with it, it's going to eat at you all day. And like you said, once you stop gambling, you have to fill that time that you were gambling with something else. For me, it was 6 to 8 hours every single day, and I had to fill that back up. That's not an easy thing to do for anyone because you get so used to doing something, you just kind of follow through with it. But you make some great points there, so thank you for bringing that up. Um, what would you? So all right, so we're moving towards mass legalization of gambling. That's just the reality of it, especially in America. I'm thinking that eventually we're going to see all 50 states with legal gambling, but who knows? I'm not sure. But at the same time, there's going to be more people placing their first bet. Do you have any specific advice you'd like to give someone that's going to place their first bet or about to place it?
Yeah. So, my best advice is see, take the money out of aside from it. I think, and we'll probably talk about this later, is that ultimately this is not a financial problem. Like, when you really get, start to peel back the layers of the gambling onion, it's really not about the money. So when you place that first bet, win or lose, whether it's $1 million or a dollar,
Mm.
take note on how does this make you feel. You know, did you lock yourself in the room to do it? Were you, why did I make this first bet? Were you with friends, or, did, your girlfriend break up with you and you had nothing else to do, and you're like, now I want some money, maybe to, like, rub it in her face. Like,
Mm.
take money out of it and evaluate the situation that way. And if it's, pretty casual, like, you bet because a buddy did it and you're cool, win or loss, moved on, then, you might be a responsible gambler. You might not be a compulsive gambler. But if you're overly emotionally invested into your first bet,
Mm.
that might be a sign to be like, hey, I might not be able to do this, like everyone else. Because I think as it's more popularized, it's just like, well, all these other people, like, aren't, going, they're all betting normally. And I think that's a common misconception, is like, gambling isn't necessarily, bad for everyone. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're compulsive with it, like, it just can't be part of your life. And, it may take some time to figure that out, but at least for your first bet, you have to just take the money aside and really, look into, like, how is this making me feel inside?
Yeah, I think that self-awareness is absolutely the key because, like I'd like to talk about a lot, millions of people out there and the majority of people out there can gamble normally. But just like with anything such as alcohol or drugs, there's certain people that are going to do it once, they're going to be hooked, and they're not going to be able to do that normally. So definitely being aware of how you're feeling when you're placing that bet, if you are placing a bet, that is the best thing that you can be doing with your mindset. That was a great point. Thank you for diving into that. Um, we talk about all the negatives that come from gambling, and there are many, many, many more than there are positives. But for me personally, I've been able to draw the positive that I learned this lesson early on in life, and now I'm able to help other people to get to that understanding as well. Were you able to draw any positives from your time gambling that you can use going forward in your life?
Yeah, I would say the younger you catch it, the better. When you catch it early on, it doesn't matter the amount that you lost, because ultimately, if you continue down that path, it's just gonna, compound and be worse.
Mm,
So from that aspect, I'm very thankful that I've gotten in the group this early. But even if you're listening to this and you're, 40, 50, 60, and you're like, you know, I don't have, 50 years to go or however long, it's never too late to,
mm,
draw that line in the sand and start to get better, because you'll realize, when you're spending 8 to 10 hours gambling a day, you can really transform that energy into very productive and beneficial things. Not just financially, but even with relationships. When you're compulsive, a lot of the times with compulsive gambler, if you're in a relationship with a significant other, uh, you may not realize the problems you caused, or like the time you've missed out, because you're just so locked into being in action. But you start to get that time back, and sometimes that's more valuable than the dollar amount you could be winning at the casino.
absolutely.
Seeing kids, grandkids growing up and being part of their lives. Um, for the older crowd or even younger crowd, if for me, like, I was so negligent in my relationship that uh, I've gotten all that time back, and feel like I'm making good strides towards kind of repairing those relationships. Uh, so yeah, and when you're really deep into it, sometimes you don't realize the friends you've lost
Mm,
because of the actions you've taken, and you may have just ignored. You're like, oh, like, maybe he just wasn't actually my friend, and it's like, no, like, you've isolated yourself so much, like, you could have contributed to that, and um, that's just part of it. When you
yeah.
when you have those, because you're very selfish in the moment, and if that's not the person you want to be, uh, when you finally stop, you start to go back to that person you used to be, and uh, I'm glad I'm getting back to that person, to be honest.
I'm glad that you are as well. It's awesome to hear that. So, Tyler, do you have any questions for me before we wrap this podcast up?
Yeah, so I think it's always an interesting debate as far as, like, is gambling an addiction?
Mm,
Like, uh, and I always found it interesting after going to GA, is that when you make your declarative statement, it's not "I am a gambling addict." It is "I am a compulsive gambler,"
mm,
and I think that's important to just maybe discuss shortly. Is that, you know let's blackjack, sports betting, all of that is really just a vessel that our
yeah.
compulsive illness, chooses to use. And I just think that, I think maybe whenever explaining it to an outsider who's not a compulsive gambler, they're like, why don't you just use willpower to not play blackjack?
Mm,
And it's so much more than that. That your brain, blackjack's just what's in front of me. You know what I mean? The stock market's just what's in front of me. Like,
mm,
I'd gamble on, which snail's going to cross the finish line if I could. And, that's just, if you're a compulsive gambler, it's just the mindset. And I think that's just a good topic, and kind of want to hear your take on why you think that in most of the Gamblers Anonymous literature, that they don't say I'm a gambling addict, and rather say I'm a compulsive gambler.
okay. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, though I can't be sure of the reasoning, I have to assume that a lot of it lies in the fact that the word addict has a lot of negative connotations to it. It kind of implies that you're doing something that, it's a sickness, you can't recover from it. But when you use compulsive gambler, you're just identifying what that problem actually is. And then you can start to work on why you use that as your vessel, as you say. So for me, looking at it, I think that rather than covering up a trauma like some people may do with their gambling, I was viewing gambling as my identity. So up until that point, I was in school, I was in high school and living like a life on a specific track. And I knew that if I followed step A, I'd get to step B. After step B, I'd get to step C. And that's kind of how it goes. After you finish that high school, you get a little bit of the same experience with college, knowing you have to finish out your classes and whatnot, but you lose a lot of the structure and the stability to your days. And that was the only thing I had in my life that gave me meaning. I thought I was a good student in high school, so I thought, you know, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm finding meaning in. And then when I lost that, I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do. And so I used gambling because it made me feel important. It made me feel like an authority figure on a topic because I spent so much time and I thought I knew so much about it. And I even knew how to make deposits on crypto casinos with my eyes closed. And that was something I was proud of. I was like, guys, I am so good at gambling that I can gamble with my eyes closed. And so I was making these bets to, avoid having to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, avoid making a structure, and avoid following through on anything that I said. Because if you have the false belief that you can make a living gambling, you don't have to get up off the couch. You don't have to find a structure. All you have to do is log in. And all you have to do is watch as the money comes in from whatever you bet on. And, in the beginning, it was a great feeling. I was feeling like it was the most meaningful thing I'd ever done, that I could make all this money, be philanthropic, like it says in the GA pamphlet, and, make enough money to help everyone else around me. But then, very, very shortly after, I realized I was just gambling because I was frustrated because I was losing and I didn't know what else to do with my time. So I was chasing a loss instead of chasing an understanding of what I needed to be doing in my life. So only after suffering for 6 years did I realize that, I can use these negative experiences to help someone else. And as you'll come to find out, as you help other people with this specific problem, you learn much more about your own version of that problem. And you realize how much you can relate to the other person by doing it. So I was using gambling to define myself, but now I'm also using gambling to define myself, but in a much different way where I can't lose anything. And that's been the biggest growth point in my life. So I hope that made sense to answer your question.
Yeah, definitely. And then another one I got is
Mm,
I find it very, and the internet has its trolls, and but I do think it's an interesting pivot that if you there's an acceptance among if you know someone with an alcohol problem, or if
mm,
you know someone with a drug problem, it's very rare you would be say, oh, you know like you should just do another line of cocaine. Like I think if you do one more and then be done,
right.
they're so close to you know being better. But with gambling as a whole, there's kind of been this build up on the internet of it's like, oh well, if you quit, like you're just like a loser, or if you
Mm,
quit, you could always be right around the corner of making it all back. And I think obviously with the other two, you can't drink and win however much amount of money. But I think as we go through this new era, I think it'll probably get better in the sense that people understand that it's a similarly hard addiction. And it's I just find it always interesting that people, like, you'd never tell a drug addict to keep doing drugs.
right.
And
I know.
obviously and I'll end that point with saying, if you are a young gambler and you feel like all your friends gamble, they are much more understanding when you come out and say, I'm really struggling with this. You'll get a lot more support than you think. It's hard in the beginning because it's so popular now, and it's like, well, dude, why don't you just take a break? But
Mm,
when you really sit them down, and if they're your true friends and if they're good people, like, the support I've gotten has been amazing. And I know it's not the same for everyone, but
Mhm.
if they don't want to support you, then ultimately, they're you might have to reevaluate some things, but you will get a lot more support because I think the people closest to you want the best for you in the end.
100%. And I think you bring up a really good point, but I think you also missed one thing. So no one would tell someone that they know is an alcoholic, like, keep drinking. Like, that would be terrible. No one really does that. Though there are people out on the internet that want to be rude, they want to feel some excitement, so they make a rude comment. But one thing with that is, like, you know, in America and in a lot of other, like, westernized countries, there's this terrible drinking culture in high schools and the first years of college. And there are people, they exhibit signs of being an alcoholic at that age, but their friends are telling them to take one more shot. And I think what's interesting about it is, like, they're telling them that because they haven't been diagnosed as alcoholics. They're not, like, trying to be rude to them or be rude in their recovery. They're trying to get them involved and live in this culture of excitement and entertainment. And when they're saying that, they're young and they haven't gotten to the point where they've seen drastically negative effects of alcohol. I mean, when you would drink in high school, maybe you drank too much and you, I don't know, like, got into an argument with a friend or something like that. But you didn't ruin a marriage by drinking. You didn't ruin your life by drinking at that age. It's just because it's fresh, it's new, it's not something that people are suffering from enough that it's being taken seriously. And that's what I think we're seeing with gambling addiction. Because, I mean, Gamblers Anonymous has been around since, like, the mid 1900s, but just now it's becoming more popular because gambling is legal now. So I think that the people that are making these comments online just don't have any experience with the pain that can come from gambling. They might have lost some bets, but it doesn't matter if you lose a couple bets in the beginning. It's about what stacks up in the long term. So I think the reason that there's trolls, and especially more within the addiction of gambling rather than a drug or alcohol addiction, is because the treatments are new. The gambling itself is new, and people just haven't experienced enough of it yet to realize that life can get pretty bad. I just made a video today that I'm posting on YouTube in about 5 minutes from when we're recording right now, that discusses why you should quit gambling as a gambling addict, even if you're winning. Because the reality is, people don't see the problem until they've experienced enough of it. And I'm hoping that by listening to this podcast, by listening to content that's out there about gambling harm, people are able to figure out that gambling is a real addiction and it can really mess up your life before it messes up their own. So, again, I hope that answered your question. Thank you for being on the podcast today. I think we touched on a lot of great points, and your story is really amazing. I want to congratulate you on the engagement that's coming up for you, and I do wish that you're able to stay clean and that your life will get better as you stay clean.
Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate you for having me on.
I appreciate you coming out for this recording, and with that, let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.